Well, we're excited once more to have Justin Bass on the Naked Bible podcast. And Justin, I want to, even though you've been on before, I want you to introduce yourself to our audience. We always get new listeners, so we're just going to start with the basics. Who is Justin Bass? Where you been? What do you teach? What's your degree in? Where'd you get it? All the basics. So if you could let us know, and then we'll get started.
Okay, what is a Justin Bass? That's what I'm gonna answer here.
There you go.
It's great to be back on. Blessed to be back on with you. And one of the things, teaching wise, I've been blessed to be able to teach some courses at the great school in Florida with you, Mike. So that's been wonderful.
Yeah, you've been very, very helpful, and the feedback's been good.
Yeah, really, really thankful for that. Just a bit about my history. The Lord opened my eyes in college. I was at Southern Methodist University, SMU. It was despite that school, had nothing to do with that school because it was a godless campus. So I think still is, but came to Christ there and jumped into Dallas Theological Seminary right after that. I'd planned to go to law school, go to business school. I had no plans of any type of religious education, and everything changed after coming to know the Lord, and just God gave me a hunger for studying His Word, for theology, for apologetics, for evangelism. And so I got a THM at DTS. I went straight through, did a PhD in New Testament studies. Planted a church soon after that. Did that for 6 years. And while I was there, I was also teaching part-time at DTS, teaching Greek in the summers. Had some great opportunities for apologetics, debates with atheists and some Muslims. And then about 5 years ago, the Lord called our family to move to the Middle East. And so I taught at a great school, probably the largest evangelical seminary in the Middle East, called Jordan Evangelical Theological Seminary. JETS for short, since it's such a full name. And so I was there for 3 years teaching there, and then came back just to promote my book that I came on the last time to talk to you about, The Bedrock of Christianity, and came back in 2020. And 2 days after I landed in the Dallas airport, they shut everything down because of COVID. Mm-hmm. So through about a 6-month process, the Lord made it clear that He was calling us to transition back here. So now I've been back for 2 years and been teaching part-time, whether at school in Florida or JETS or a great school in India as well, and a Bible college here. I've been teaching part-time at a lot of different schools, and I'm working on my next book right now, talking about dreams and visions of Jesus, and how that's just a worldwide phenomenon all over the world. Just some amazing accounts and stories, and really using that as a further apologetic for the resurrection and for the fact that Jesus is Lord of the world. And so that's kind of brings me up to now.
Yeah, you're busy. You got your hands full.
Yeah, it's fun though. I'm blessed. I'm thankful.
Yeah, it's a good kind of busy.
It's good work God's given me.
Well, in view of your prior work that we referenced when we were going through the Book of Revelation, specifically on the Underworld, I get emails all the time about, hey Mike, what's Sheol? What's the abyss? What about the lake of fire? What about Gehenna? You pick your way through your email, and I can answer these sorts of questions briefly, in email format. But I thought, I get this question enough.
I get them too. I know it's such people are fast. It's like The Descent. That was my first book dissertation was on, and people are fascinated by these subjects. That's why I wrote about it. I'm fascinated by it as well, and I know you are. Yeah.
And it's good. It's good you can do your dissertation on something you're actually interested in.
This was great advice I got from Dan Wallace, Dr. Wallace. He told me early on. He said start early and pick something you like.
No, it's very true. But I get the question enough. I thought we need to devote some episode time on the podcast to this. So contacted you, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to have really 2 interviews. This is part 1. This episode, on really afterlife terminology in the Bible, biblical afterlife terms. And so we want to jump in here. Naturally, the place to start is the Old Testament, but we're going to be going in both interviews because we're going to land on specific terms, and they're going to be both have an Old Testament sort of heritage and New Testament use, Second Temple Judaism. So we're going to jump around to all the chronological eras in both interviews, but we're going to start here with the logical place to begin, and that is Sheol in the Old Testament. So let's just jump in there with Sheol, and then we'll get into Hades a little bit before we hit probably the abyss and Tartarus yet in this episode. So for those of you who are into this topic, we've got Justin here for two episodes, and let's just start off again, like I said, with Sheol. So Justin, why don't you introduce this concept and this term to our audience?
Yeah, I part of the thing that really fascinated me about Sheol as I was working through this on my dissertation, just the kind of universality of this is where everyone is going.
Where would that go? Yep.
Going back to Genesis, Sheol's used 66 times. I think they've nailed it down 66 times in the Old Testament, and it's used mostly in the Psalms. I think 16 times in the Psalms, but it's scattered throughout the books of the Old Testament. You see it already in Genesis, and then throughout the Torah, and this is many times mentioned as the place. It's where Jacob goes. It's where Samuel goes. It's where, but it's also where Korah and his rebellion, and where wicked kings are arising from their beds of maggots. And so it's a fascinating place. We call it the Underworld. I think that's the best English.
Yeah, I would agree.
To use for it. It's just the place, the Underworld, and it very well may be that the ancient Israelites and even maybe some of the Christians, they thought of it as something somewhere in the depth of the ocean or in the depth of some part of the world physically. But I think we all understand the idea of it as a different realm. It's deep you dig, you're not going to get to.
Right. Everybody knows you'll wind up in China. You're not going to wind up in Sheol.
Exactly.
No, that's important, because these afterlife terms, they don't have literal latitude and longitude,
right.
in or around the earth, but they are non-terrestrial places. Again, just like we think of the afterlife in general, we still have this sense of vocabulary. We pass over, we pass on. We still use this kind of terminology. We go to, XYZ place after we die. And we all know intuitively that, again, you can't just, buy a roadmap or, your GPS isn't going to work here.
That's right. Exactly.
We all know this, but yet somehow when it comes to the Bible, we some people, I think, temporarily forget it. That, it doesn't work this way physically. It works this way. Conceptually or spiritually, that both the righteous and the unrighteous go to this place, the Sheol. So how would you describe it? What is it?
And on that point, I know you love to use the upside down world imagery, and I don't know if you caught up with the latest of Stranger Things, but
yeah, we have.
My wife and I are watching it. We haven't finished the latest last season, but it's great. But I think it's a great image because I think it captures the idea also, not only that it's not somewhere we can dig down deep into the earth and find, it's also not something that if we go deep into the, what the new Webster telescope or Webb telescope has shown, deep in the recesses of the universe, if we keep going somewhere deep in the universe, we're not going to find it either. I like the upside down world imagery because it's right here. Like it's heaven and earth and Sheol, this kind of 3-part, universe. They're interacting and yet they're distinct. They're distinct and yet they are interacting. And that's kind of the whole idea of Revelation 21 and 22 is that's when everything, the veil will be opened and heaven and earth will be united in the new heavens and the new earth. And so, but yeah, you said the question you asked, what is it? I think the best way to say it is, Hades, the word that's used to translate Sheol throughout the Greek translation of the Old Testament, literally means Hades. It's like they got that ha in front of it. That's where we get Hades, but the alpha at the front is like theos, without God. And so Hades, this word that goes back to Homer, He's using it as a way to describe the unseen world, the invisible world. And they even talks about the helmet of Hades, personified Hades is a helmet that you wear that makes you invisible. And so it's an invisible realm. It's a realm that souls go. It's a realm that the spiritual beings, angels, other beings that God created also go. So it's a place that I think just it's a catch-all word that captures this realm that is not earth, that is not the heavens, and it's a place that at least before Christ, is one of my main arguments, is that this is a place where both the righteous and the dead go. And I think it's interesting. We do have a few exceptions. Enoch and Elijah, I think, can be seen as some fascinating exceptions, and maybe Moses as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, just this is why the difficulty of navigating the terminology is why I typically just use terms like, this is where the afterlife dead go. That's the realm of the dead or something like that.
Yeah.
Because it is portrayed as this alternate reality that you can't actually, go to and visit and so on and so forth with our physical tools. So we need to just sort of get that out of the way right up front. Now, like everything else in the Old Testament, it seems this is going to have some ancient Near Eastern backdrop to it. Can you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, I it seems that when it comes to the unseen world, like you said, the afterlife of the dead, you have this, strikingly similar picture of what that life is like. This shit, the Rephaim, the shades, the
cadaverous existence. Yes.
Yeah, the shadowy, gloomy. Doesn't look very fun. Achilles isn't very happy in Hades. It's not pictured as it's just pictured as a shadowy, gloomy existence. And it just seems across the board. This seems to be, at least from the ancient Near East and even Egypt, this seems to be the way that they're picturing the afterlife. And I always wonder, I don't know what you think about this, but I'm interested, especially, in light of some of the things I'm doing with my book, like near-death experiences, NDEs. And, there's a great story in Plato's Republic where they have the myth of and was this soldier who was thought to be killed, or really was killed, but thought to stay dead. And he was found among all these soldiers, and he came back to life. He was dead they at least thought he was dead for a while. And then he came back to life, and he was able to describe what the afterlife was like. And of course it was, the imagery was similar to the picture we're talking about of whether Sheol or Hades. And I wonder if that's how maybe, some of these peoples actually got an image of the afterlife, an accurate portrayal of the afterlife that the Bible put its stamp of approval on, is because maybe some of them had some type of NDE experience, but not sure on that. But you do see this agreement across the board of what it's going to look like in the afterlife. I think you get fuller revelation as you move forward that there is this, as I argued, a very positive experience as well in the afterlife for the righteous, but that's not fully expected and not fully known, I think, in the early stages.
Yeah, I mean, it's overwhelmingly negative. Sometimes with Egypt, you get some exceptions, but and that's just for the pharaohs, because they're going back to be with the gods and
right.
all the Egyptian religion. But even for them, it can still be a fearful thing. They have to successfully navigate, Apophis and some of these other threats. It's not like it's not easy.
That's right.
Even for them, so it's overwhelmingly negative. And both the righteous, you brought up examples in Genesis with Jacob, when he hears about, his son, or what he thinks happened to Joseph, and he says, "Oh, now I'm going to go down to Sheol, to my son mourning," in Genesis 37-35, and you get it in Genesis 42 and 44. He just assumed that Joseph is in the realm of the dead because of what his brothers had concocted and told him. So he just assumes that that this is where Joseph is. It's where he's going to go. And for all the biblical portrayal, these are positive characters. I mean, Jacob is, he's got some shady episodes in his life. We know that.
Yeah.
But Joseph, I mean, certainly Joseph, is certainly portrayed very positively. But he goes to the same place.
And even the prophet Samuel. I mean, I think his account
there you go.
is very fascinating.
Yeah, 1 Samuel 28 there. Yeah.
The way he describes it, he's saying, why are you disturbing me? So you get an indication that there is some sort of maybe rest on his part, but definitely not anything to go real deep on. Josephus, when he tells that story, he uses he uses the word Hades there. So another.
Yeah, there you go. Another
parallel.
Yeah, another parallel.
This is the same realm, and that's what's interesting is Samuel's not coming as Saul's calling upon him. He's not coming from heaven speaking to him. He's coming from.
He's coming up. Yeah,
it's coming up, and so it's and then it parallels again the Isaiah 14 verse 9 where you have these kings on beds of maggots and things, and they're all stirred up, and they say you are going to become weak like us. That definitely has that clear parallel to kind of Odysseus and the Homeric imagery of the way the kings now feel in the underworld. But these would definitely they're being presented as this is the unbeliever's experience. So
and for those interested in the audience, in the things like NDEs, I mean, in the evangelical world, I think Gary Habermas is the one who's paid most attention to this stuff.
Yes.
But I've read enough of it to know that you still, even in modern day accounts, you still get this cadaverous kind of existence in a number of at least parts of episodes. It's not all, I went and there was my lifelong friend, my pet dog that I lost when I was 10. It's not always this rosy picture. I mean,
that's right.
You do get some of the other side for sure. Yeah, I don't know I don't think we should be drawing our theology from NDEs, but they can be helpful in terms of just what people experience, and then, like you said, to align.
And argue, and they argue, I think, in a lot of ways that there is something,
something that transcends death.
Exactly. It's not what Sam Harris wants to say, that we're just turned off like a computer.
Truth be told, I just read a part of a book on animals and NDEs. And I'm sure there's going to be some people out there in the audience that are laughing, like Mike, really, you actually spent time reading that? Yeah, because I thought it was interesting. I've read enough about NDEs to know that animals actually show up in these things. And what's really interesting is you get some cases where the animal NDE doesn't have any earthly connection to the person having the NDE, but it'll be like a neighbor's cat, and the person who's dead will know that the neighbor's cat has died while he or she is supposed to be dead. So, like, how does that happen?
Interesting.
How do they get this knowledge when they're for all intents and purposes they're dead, and then the next door neighbor's cat or whatever passes away, and they wake up with this knowledge. I mean, there are things like that I agree with you that have value in apologetics, that there's something going on here that transcends just a materialistic worldview, if you can put it that way.
Definitely.
Yeah. So what do you think Yahweh's relationship is to Sheol?
Yeah, that's my favorite when it comes to those passages that deal with what's going to happen, how Yahweh not only has power and complete control over the underworld. This is not some dark side that he's completely on the other side of and has no control over, and it's definitely pictured as like Proverbs 15:11, for example. Sheol and Abaddon are completely open; they lie naked before Yahweh. He sees all. First Samuel 2:6. He raises. He puts to death and he raises to life. He can put them into Sheol and he can take them out.
Yeah. In Psalm 139, the famous psalm there, if I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there.
Can't get away from him.
Yeah.
Can't get away from God. And I think this goes to the expectation too, because you do have this, and especially even as early, with the patriarchs, what's Jacob's expectation of this afterlife? He has hope in Yahweh, but he clearly has this understanding of a gloomy existence in this realm called Sheol, and he's anticipating that he's going to go there. And we believe he did go there, but did he get a surprise? Was it a little bit better than
or did he
thought?
Did he have to stay?
and ultimately, did he have to stay? And did he have this knowledge and hope of one day being rescued out? And that is the kind of idea I think you get like in Psalm 73 and the end of Psalm 22 and then of course the big resurrection passages like Isaiah 26 and Daniel 12, that ultimately, Yahweh is going to take me to be, he's going to take me out of here. Ultimately, he's going to rescue me. I think that's, you get this anticipation and this hope of that happening. And even people who didn't know that, I think would have learned that in the afterlife and also been pleasantly surprised. I think Kohelet, Solomon, probably was happy to see that it wasn't as bad as maybe he thought the underworld would be like. But yeah, and then I like the parallels with Sheol and Mot. Death and Sheol are lockstep. They're together in a lot of ways, and you have that imagery of Sheol as this huge enlarged throat swallowing up humanity, swallowing up things.
Humanity gets swallowed up by death. Yeah.
But then in Isaiah, that's in Isaiah 5, and then in Isaiah 25, it says that Yahweh will swallow up death, swallow up Mot. And so I just love that. Yahweh is actually the great swallower.
It's a nice word play there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful picture. And then Hosea 13 would be another, the one that Paul quotes, of course, in 1 Corinthians 15, but it doesn't seem like Paul uses Hades there, which is interesting. He in Hosea 13, it does say Sheol there. And so you have this idea that ultimately Sheol and Hades will be conquered. They will be.
It's very clear, in Hosea 13. I shall ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. Death, where are your plagues? Oh, Sheol, where is your sting? And again, this is language we associate with Paul, like you said, but right there it is out of Hosea. I agree with you. I take a bit more of a positive view of the Old Testament afterlife than I know some even evangelical Old Testament scholars do. I'm not sure why that is. There just seems to be a more universal negativity here, but I think some of these passages are pretty clear that there was an Old Testament hope, an afterlife hope of being delivered from Sheol.
That's the picture. That's the picture I see. They had a hope, if not as Gandalf would say, a fool's hope, but they had a hope. Some of them might have thought of it as a fool's hope, but they did have this strong hope, and I don't see how they couldn't have, with especially when they saw the power of Yahweh and his experience, the experience with him in their lives. So.
You already mentioned the Greek background with Septuagint, how the Septuagint is going to render this as Hades or Hades. What about speaking more broadly, just branch out into intertestamental literature, the Second Temple material? I know you've already mentioned Josephus, but can we talk a little bit about that? Like, one obvious question is Sheol or Hades hell? How much of our sort of church concept of this is accurate or overlays, aligns with what we see in text, especially as we're creeping into the New Testament period?
Yeah, this is one of probably the greatest misunderstandings of Hades, that Hades is hell, and many English translations of the Bible perpetuate this misunderstanding because they'll translate Hades, and even as we'll talk about Tartarus, they'll translate that in 2 Peter 2:4. They'll translate that as hell. Really misleading to put those as hell, because I think theologically, we want to think of. I think the Old Testament and New Testament is consistent that what we think of as hell is a future punishment that is still really unoccupied. It's somewhere. It's something that will be filled by devils or demons, Satan and unbelievers, but after the final judgment. So the place of punishment, there is still a place of temporary punishment, and that would be within what we're talking about as Sheol or in the Greek Hades. And I think that works out. Even we already see that kind of development, and I think it's because of this kind of tension already there in the Hebrew scriptures. The intertestamental authors like Josephus, First Enoch 22 is a key chapter. Encourage those listening to just go and read that chapter. It's fascinating because he's really you're seeing this picture of the underworld that is pictured with the righteous separated from the wicked, and they have two different very different experiences. Very much likening to the probably what we'll talk about later, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that Jesus tells. So I think Jesus isn't being really original there. He's bringing in this understanding of the afterlife that goes back to the Old Testament. But that's
might as well jump into that. You want to jump into Luke 16? Go ahead. Yeah,
Luke 16, 19 through.
Do you think it matters if it's a parable or not?
Yeah, what I like to say is, one thing that's fascinating is it's the only parable of Jesus that names someone. So that's I always find that interesting. But I always say, because people like to say, oh, well, it's a parable, so you can't build your theology off the parable, which is true. But to me, it's similar to the parable of the Good Samaritan. If there's not that path to Jericho, right? It doesn't matter as much whether that actually happened, but the path to Jericho has to really exist for the story to make sense.
Yeah.
So in the same way, this geography of the underworld needs to be true for this parable to make sense, is what I would say. So was there actually a person named Lazarus, and did he actually have this conversation with Abraham? I'm open to arguments on both sides. I think it actually did happen. I'm on that side, but that's not necessary. But I think the cosmic geography for Jesus's point to be made, the situation in the afterlife, because Jesus is pretty much threatening, again, not hell, but a serious punishment, and really actually hell, but a future hell, but a temporary place of punishment is where they're going to go immediately for these Pharisees that he's talking to in the context of Luke 16, those who are greedy and worshiping money rather than God. If their whole life and love is of money and not of God, then they are going to, like this rich man, they're going to end up in this place. And so if that place doesn't exist, if it's not like that, then it just doesn't make sense to me. I think the threat becomes, kind of meaningless. And so I take it as an actual story, an actual, reality that Jesus is kind of pulling back the curtain and showing us what happened in this instance. But again, I think the cosmic geography of the unseen world is I think that needs to be accurate, and it goes back to seeds in the Old Testament, and then places like First Enoch 22, Josephus Josephus says this is actually what the Pharisees believed. He actually specifically says, the Pharisees believed that there were punishments and rewards for the righteous and the wicked in Hades.
Yeah, again, because it's just a general afterlife location. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So I think Jesus would be authenticating this picture of the afterlife that was already pretty widespread, at least among Jews in that intertestamental time frame.
What are some good, interesting passages?
So, Hades is used 10 times in the New Testament. It's got a wide variety here, and it's interesting if you just go to a concordance, you can just see the 10 uses of it and look up each passage. I encourage those listening to do that. So it's a very, very informative way to do it. When Jesus, parallels, the heights of heaven to the depths of Hades, how this is going to be the judgment for these nations who reject him, who reject his miracles. This is in Matthew 11 and Luke 10. That again is just, a straight parallel use of the Old Testament use of Hades / Sheol. And also the quotation in Acts 2, this is one of my key texts for the descent of Christ into Hades is that, he will not abandon, God will not abandon Christ's soul into Hades. He will not leave him there. He will rescue him out of there. That's Acts 2:27 and 31, quoting, Psalm 16. Again, just picturing the realm of the underworld, and that's where.
And there you go. I mean, Jesus winds up there, temporarily.
Right.
So again, it's very similar to Sheol, where the righteous and the unrighteous both go to the same place. They're going to have different experiences ultimately, but it's interesting that that's a key text for you because it's so transparent. I mean, it's Jesus. Look, for goodness sake.
That's right. Yeah. To me,
what better example could you have?
Exactly. I mean, to me, that's just one of the there's a few others, but that would be a go-to text that I don't see how you can read that, especially in the Greek. You cannot read that without it understanding it as the soul of Jesus was in Hades for a time. So then you have to explain, well, what does that mean? Are there other passages that help us illuminate what Christ did? And so one of the things I do argue that I think Jesus did do when he was there is he is rescuing those, just like they had hoped. He is rescuing those souls from the place of Abraham's bosom that's pictured in that parable. Different language for that realm, but if you use the parable, the those who are in Abraham's bosom, Abraham obviously, but Isaac, Jacob, Jacob's going to be real happy here. Samuel, David, David says, I'm going to my son who is in Sheol. So I think the evidence is that Jesus went there, and one of the things he did is he took them from that realm to
he fulfills the hope of the righteous. Yeah.
Yes. He is Yahweh in the flesh, in the resurrected flesh, actually rescuing them, just like he said. And one day he'll, when we talk about kind of the beginning and the end of Hades / Sheol, is this idea of, one day he will call all the dead from that realm. And that's Revelation 20 for the judgment. And so even the wicked will be called from that realm in their to be united to their resurrected bodies. And then they will be righteously judged by Christ. And then they will be cast into the lake of fire if their names are not written in the book of life. That's kind of the picture we get with Revelation 20, but it's so powerful because it's again, Jesus, who is Yahweh in the flesh, now doing this with the entire. I think this would be the fulfillment of Isaiah 25, swallowing up those realms. The realms will ultimately be not needed. They will be completely done away with. And that's why they're pictured as personified, being thrown themselves onto the true hell, which Revelation pictures as the lake of fire.
What do you think about the personification of Hades in Revelation 1:18? I mean, this is kind of your sweet spot with your earlier book. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I do the kind of just a background of that, because you have, again, death and Hades together, Mot and Sheol, and you see them together a lot in the Old Testament. You see them a lot together in the intertestamental literature, and most of the time they are definitely, death is a state of existence, and Hades or Sheol is a realm. It's like a house, like it's pictured as like a fortified castle with gates, but they're also personified. And so I think, again, they're not actually specific beings. I think they are personified to
make a point. Yeah.
The Jews and the Christians are using the imagery that is common to their Greco-Roman audience of Hades, is a god as personified. And so it's a way of, giving Jesus kind of, these powers to conquer. But there is a reality even behind those powers. And of course, that reality would be the satanic forces that ultimately so the Christus Victor idea of what Jesus did at the cross, and even after the cross, that triumph that continued into the underworld. And so that's what I'm arguing in Revelation 1:18, that when he talks about the keys, he's wresting the keys from these powers, which, depending on who was reading it, whether an Egyptian, whether a Greek, whether a Roman, whether a Jew, they would have all had different imagery in their minds of the powers in the underworld that Jesus would have had to conquer. And the point is he conquered them all, whatever you can imagine as the power there. he conquered them, and now he has control. Jesus is
Yeah,
Lord.
he has the keys. Yeah.
The dead and the living.
When do you think we get the beginning of Sheol and Hades? I mean, the realm of the dead.
Yeah, I was going to see what you think about that. I was thinking about that myself. Just probably. I mean, my guess would be when death enters the world. So Genesis 3, kind of the fall.
Yeah, that's how I think of it too.
Yeah. You do have, the rabbis will place some of those, I think, in kind of eternity, right? They some of the rabbinic writings, I think they want to say, like, one of the things God made before the creation of the world was Gehenna.
They're just kind of winging it.
Yeah, exactly. And when we talk about Gehenna, we'll talk about the errors of the rabbis. That's the fascinating thing, is how the rabbis, because they're so separate. This is what frustrates me so many times when scholars try to parallel what the rabbis are saying, post Bar Kokhba to
it's so late.
The Jews of the first century. They're just, it's almost like they're from completely different worlds. I mean, the first century Jews are very different in their thinking than the rabbis of the second, third centuries.
Yeah. I would agree. So you mentioned Tartarus. So how is Sheol, Hades different or similar to the abyss and Tartarus? I mean, what are these just terms for the same place? Do we get sort of neighborhoods in the afterlife? Is one a subset of another? I mean, how do you approach this?
Yeah, what I see is, I think the seeds are there in the Old Testament. So abyss would be the Greek word that's used to translate to home, and some of those other terms for, like, the deep or the ocean. Abyss, obviously, just, again, that alpha in the front means without bottom, bottomless, which, give credence to them who came up with this, because using it for the ocean, that's kind of cool, because even today, with all our technology, we still haven't, how much of the ocean have we actually discovered? There's still so much of the depths of the ocean we haven't even been to. So it really is like the abyss, even to us in the 21st century. So I was thinking about that, but I think what they're doing is they're describing the locale now specifically of where these disobedient angels went, and we're in agreement on the interpretation of Genesis 6, and
this is where they're under house arrest. So.
Yeah, and it's pictured, and what's really interesting is pictured as, like, so in one sense you could say the abyss is a part of Sheol, but at the bottom, or you could say it's its own realm below Sheol. you could I think the language allows for both, but the idea is it's the depth, it's the very, very bottom of this, again, the cosmic geography of this realm, and who's housed here is not human souls. This is the place for the disobedient spirit. So this is a place of
the proverbial special place,
who fell, or as you like to say, Elohim. Certain Elohim who rebelled and fell. They are housed here, and really housed in chains. And so it's fascinating that we have a lot of fallen angels that are roaming and actively waging spiritual warfare on earth and in the heavenly realms, but these particular ones are now there in the abyss. They're at the depths.
To the end of days, there's an eschatological release, but that's going to be short-lived as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll also be released. We get the picture of them being released, and again, it's being pictured as a place that needs a key. So you have a certain, presumably good angel coming down and has a key to the abyss, and he opens it up. This is in Revelation 9, and then you even have this named after the god Apollo. You have a angel, clearly a fallen angel, that's over the abyss. That's kind of a leader of the demons below, and then he comes out, and this is to do their worst, to unleash hell on earth in a way for the tribulation. But that's in Revelation 9. But the word abyss in the New Testament, it's used 9 times. It's used 9 times in the New Testament, and all of them are specific. All of them except one are specifically talking about the realm of demonic spirits or fallen angels, The place where it's kind of parallel to Sheol is Romans 10. So again, it's another descent passage, and Paul's kind of putting the contrast of the highest of heavens to the depths of the underworld. So he uses the abyss there. But other than that, you have most of the uses in Revelation where demons are dwelling. But there's a passage in Luke 8 that's really interesting, and you don't find it in the parallel synoptics. And it's when the demons are begging Jesus to, the legion of demons are begging Jesus to let them go into the pigs. But at one point they say, are you going to send us into the abyssos? That uses that word. And so you get this picture that, the demons are aware of where their compatriots have gone.
Yeah, don't send us there. Yeah, at least not
wherever, just not there. And interestingly, Jesus answers their prayers. It's one of the, when I preach on that passage, I like to say, demons pray to Jesus and he answers them and they're still damned. We can pray to Jesus and he doesn't. He says no to us and we're saved. And so, the answer to the prayers and everything.
What about Tartarus? Do you think that's essentially a synonym for the abyss?
Yeah, so that's what I think.
That's what it's sounding to me.
Yeah,
I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, Tartarus is only used once in the New Testament, and it's second Peter 2:4. And so my view on this is, Tartarus is the same as the abyss. It's just Peter is, again, speaking to a Greco-Roman audience primarily in 2 Peter, I would say, he's using the imagery that they would, most understand. And of course, Tartarus is again, in their cosmic geography of Hades in the Greek world, this was the place below Hades that housed the Titans who had rebelled against Zeus. And so I think I like to parallel. We could even say it's like us talking about the upside down world of Stranger Things, because people are familiar with that term, so that it helps them understand the picture that the Bible's presenting of the unseen realms of the underworld or of heaven. Or we could say, this person was thrust into the ninth circle of Dante's hell. That would be kind of what I think Peter's doing. He's using a term that is familiar to his audience to describe what the biblical text is teaching.
Yeah, and even to use that current contemporary parallel, the upside down, even in this latest season, it's very clear that the creators of the show, they're different places in the upside down. I mean, some are more more awful than others, and you get the cadaverous existence. That's pretty obvious in so many scenes, but there it's more, if I could use the word, hellish. There are parts of it that are more evil, than even just the general existence. So you still get this neighborhood kind of feel, or there are these places within places, subsets and sets and so on and so forth.
Like Isaiah, I think it's
they
Isaiah.
do a decent
26.
job of that.
Yeah, I agree. Isaiah 26 uses the word chambers, or can't remember the Hebrew word there, but the English, I like that English translation. The chambers, there's different chambers of these realms. I was going to bring in the 1 Peter 3 passage. I just wanted to parallel there too. The 1 Peter 3 and the Jude 6. I think again this is both talking about, because now they're referring directly to the Genesis 6 fallen spirits and where they dwell, and I think, and 1 Peter 3 specifically uses that word in the Greek phulake, which is the word for prison, which interestingly is the same word used in Revelation for the prison of these spirits. So you have a lot of these parallels here. So I think that's the same as Tartarus, same as the abyss.
This stuff is so clear.
Descends.
I just I'll ask an opinion question here. I mean, the you can trace the thought, the development of the thought, parallels. Just all the commentary that you've been giving us here. I mean, there's not a whole lot here that's murky as far as who's where, and the whole Genesis 6 thing and 1 Peter 3. But yet it just seems to be it's very consistent. It's one of the few things in biblical studies that is consistent.
That's true. I mean, it is amazing. I mean, you'd think that they would get some of this, kind of mess up the details on some of this, but they don't. They're very consistent on these.
They're very consistent, but yet there's this resistance within even evangelical circles of owning up to this. Why do you think that is?
One of the things I talk about in the dissertation and the book, the Battle for the Keys, one of the things I found fascinating was it was really post-Reformation that beginning at the Reformation was the first time that Christians anywhere started doubting the descent. This idea that Jesus went into these realms.
I remember this from your book. Yeah, go ahead. You should, please say something about that. Yeah.
And it did seem like what was interesting is it was as if that they were, of course, rejecting a lot of things that I think were wrong in the Roman Catholic system at the time. But they seemed to they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater and going so far as to deny things that I think are clearly scriptural like this. And yet what's interesting though is they kept heaven. They kept heaven. They kept Jesus at the right hand of God. They kept all these ideas of angels and heaven. So they're allowing they're fine with an unseen realm and all these things on the kind of the good side in the heavenly realms. But for the underworld, they just kind of said, oh, no, Jesus just, he just went to the dead, or he's just in the grave. Yeah. He just, there's nothing to that descent language. Let's just throw that out. And it just seems like, the vast majority of in the Protestant side, it just seems like they've kind of kept that kind of unwarranted skepticism about the realms of the underworld. And it started at the Reformation, so that kind of makes sense of the origin. But you just would think that more would question that once they got to the text and started to see how clear this really is. And some are pushing back on it. A guy, professor he's at Oklahoma Baptist University, Matthew Emerson. He wrote a book called "He Descended to the Dead," but he's arguing pretty much what I'm arguing about Christ's descent, and he uses my book a lot. And that in the Baptist world, that's gotten a lot of people more interested in the subject and changing their views on it. So I have seen some changing on this, and
well, that's good.
That needs to happen.
Yeah, that's good. Wow. Well, this is a good place to wrap up this episode, and we'll transition into some of the other vocabulary the next time that we have a conversation about part 2. But I just want to thank you for your work. I think people in this audience are just going to be glad to know that, hey, there's somebody else out there besides Mike who takes this stuff seriously. It helps.
God raise up many more.
Right. Yeah, it kind of helps. But just thanks for being on with us, and I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion.
Yes, me too. This is great.
All right, Mike, a great conversation about hell and Hades and Tartarus and all that. Can you wrap it up real quick, summarize it? Hades is not hell. There's compartments in Hades. Sheol is the lowest portion or chamber of Hades. I mean, can you give me a high summary view for me?
Yeah, I think by way of a sort of a cursory summary, you get this vocabulary for the afterlife in both testaments, but especially the New, that isn't the quote unquote lake of fire hell as we think of it, because that is something that is sort of formed and created in the book of Revelation. So it's more eschatological. So that's the basic distinction that Justin is angling for. And I mean, not everybody goes that direction, but I think it has some advantages to certainly doing that. As far as compartments and neighborhoods and things like that, yeah, I mean, if we just think of the afterlife in general, there is a proverbial special place in hell, but some place in the afterlife for the sinning angels, the sons of Genesis 6, that would be the abyss. Tartarus, the abyss and Tartarus, two ways of referring to the same thing. So you do get these places within places, these, again, neighborhoods or subsets in the vocabulary, which is, again, it makes it interesting. But we have to remember it's not physical. Again, your GPS isn't going to work there. We don't have specific latitude and longitude. And I like the way Justin made the comment real briefly about Hades in Greek, Hades, and how in Greek that just means a place that is unknown. There's something for some words in Greek when they begin with the letter alpha, like this, and it's actually Hades, but Hades, it has that specific letter. It's what's called a privative. It negates something, and in this case, the rest of the term means a place that can be known or seen. So it's like an invisible place. Now that's how we need to think about these sorts of terms in this kind of language. Well, we're happy once again to have Justin Bass with us. Dr. Bass was with us in a previous episode talking about biblical terms for the afterlife. Both good and bad. Mostly bad the first time around. But we got into some of the other cosmic geographical terminology. We're going to continue that discussion this time. But again, for the sake of people who have not listened to part one yet, and I highly recommend before even listening to this one that you go listen to part one. But in case not, I'm going to ask Justin to briefly introduce himself, and then we'll jump right into it. So, Justin, thanks for being back with us.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's been great having this discussion. And just a little bit about myself again. I the Lord opened my eyes to Himself over 20 years ago now, 2001. I was in college, and God gave me a hunger for His Word and for apologetics, for theology, and threw me into seminary, Dallas Theological Seminary, and did a THM and a PhD. And since then, I planted a church and taught at various schools and did mission work in the Middle East and written a few books, one on the resurrection, and my dissertation, which is a lot about what we're talking about, got published, called The Battle for the Keys. I actually have a chapter in that book that talks about these different compartments that we're talking about, Hades and Sheol and the abyss and Tartarus and Gehenna and the lake of fire and Abraham's bosom and paradise and third heaven, and just all this different these fascinating terms of the cosmic geography, the unseen realms geography that we have from the scriptures. I get into in that book, so y'all can go, those listening can go deeper in there in the battle for the keys. But,
yeah, we've referenced that book before, again, in our own series on Revelation. I do highly recommend it. It's an academic work, but that's not going to scare people in this audience. It's quite a good book, very interesting. Again, focused on the keys passages in the book of Revelation, but you do pick up on a lot of this stuff, which is why the way I preface this in part one of our discussion was I get questions a lot on not only Old Testament, but Old and New Testament afterlife vocabulary. Hey, what's Gehenna? What's the lake of fire? Is that the same as Tartarus? Is that the same as the abyss? What's Sheol? All this sort of stuff. So when I sort of got it in my head that, this is really worth some podcast time, I thought right away of Justin Bass, and that's why he spent the previous episode with us talking about this vocabulary, and we're going to resume it here. But Justin has spent a lot of time, devoted a lot of time, and certainly in writing has devoted considerable space to discussing all this stuff. So he's sort of the perfect person to have back on. So Justin, thanks for coming back on, and we might as well just jump right into Gehenna. Again, for those of you who haven't listened to part one, you really need to do that, because we're not going to rehearse part one and part two. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some overlap, but part one, we talked about Sheol and Hades and the abyss and Tartarus, and we might as well just jump right into Gehenna. So what's Gehenna? I mean, where does the term come from? All these sorts of questions.
Yeah. We talked a little bit in part one about how some of the translations of the English translations of the Bible are very misleading. And I even have before me right now a great example. The NASB, I'm sure you agree, is one of the most wooden literal translations. And I'm a huge fan of the NASB. If I'm struggling with any passage in the original language, I'm going to grab the NASB and see what it's saying. But even the NASB on 2 Peter 2:4 translates Tartarus there as hell. So just why did they do that? Why did they translate that hell? I got to find the person translating
to give you something to write about later.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this happens a lot. You have the same in Luke 16. We talked about the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and when it says the rich man lifted up his eyes in hell, a lot of translations will put hell there, even though in the Greek, again, it's Hades, and it's not referring to what we would call the future eternal place of punishment, which the primary term for that in the New Testament, mainly on the lips of Jesus, is Gehenna. So when we talk about Gehenna, we're basically talking about what we would say is the future hell. And interestingly, there's no one in Gehenna right now. No souls, no no resurrected bodies. Gehenna is an empty place that is prepared for the devil and his angels.
So it's an eschatological place.
It's an eschatological realm that will in some way be parallel to the new heavens and the new earth, the new Jerusalem, as pictured in Revelation. Because as we'll talk about, I think the lake of fire imagery in Revelation is the same as Gehenna. We see some very key parallels between the two conceptually in the New Testament. But Gehenna, the background of it, again, it's an actual place. It's really the valley of Hinnom, which is
Gehenna,
yeah. And so it just became this word Gehenna, but really it goes back to Hinnom, the valley of Hinnom, which is a place that, as far as the Old Testament's concerned, is a place where a lot of wicked, evil things happened, especially with certain kings like Manasseh. Is said to have sacrificed children there, and this just seemed to be one of those places that a dark place where I'm sure demons were heavily inhabiting because of so much evil practices that were being done there, and whether polytheistic or whether idolatry or actual physical sacrifices, all kinds of things you could read about in 2 Kings 23, in Jeremiah 7, just some key passages that talk about it. But that seems to be the background, and that's why Gehenna became for the Jewish world. This became the key term for the eschatological hell to come because of all the wickedness that happened in this place.
I have the Jeremiah passage here in front of me. I'll just read it for our audience just so they can fix this in their minds. They have built the high places of Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom. So you have Valley Gay, and then Hinnom is the term there. Gay Hinnom is where Gehenna comes from. To burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will be no Tophet, or the valley of water, so forth. But I mean, it's a very dark place. I mean, just to put it mildly.
Yes, and again, this is the key term that Jesus used. I believe it's used 12 times in the New Testament. 11 of the times is by Jesus. The 12 times is by his brother. So James uses it once in James 3. He's talking about the fact that the tongue is set on fire by Gehenna. So just more of a metaphorical use of it. But the way Jesus uses it primarily is, this is where you who reject me, you who follow the path of wickedness, you who reject eternal life, this ultimately is where you will end up. And this is again where the fire imagery comes from. The imagery goes before Jesus, but Jesus consistently will use fire, the fiery Gehenna, describing it as a place of fire. But he also describes it as a place where maggots are eating the flesh and things like that. So a lot of different imagery for just basically a horrific, miserable existence.
Yeah, I mean, the fire, obviously, the most obvious reference there is, like I just read, passing, children through the fire. I mean, this whole Old Testament, not sanctioned by the Old Testament, obviously, but you read about it in the Old Testament, this practice in certain idolatrous contexts they were doing, in this place, child sacrifice and whatnot. So it's a place of death. It's a place of suffering. The death and the suffering was caused by the burning. So that's the most obvious reference. But you might want to comment on, because there's a lot of either other information or some would say mythology that has sort of accrued to this about a garbage dump and so on and so forth. You have any opinion on that as far as the fire origin, the fire description of Gehenna?
Yeah, that the idea of this garbage dump that's constantly on fire. I just haven't found the evidence for it. It's just one of those things that you hear.
You and a lot of other people.
Yeah, you hear a lot of sermon illustrations without citing the sources. This is like that great one with the the high priest had that rope tied around his foot, when he'd go into the Holy of Holies. And
I really want that to be.
I know that's one of those that we want to be true, or like when Saint Nicholas punched. Who did he punch? He punched Arius. Santa Claus punching the heretic. You just want those stories to be true, but the evidence is just not forthcoming. So yeah, that's a common kind of myth on that.
Let's we don't want anybody in the audience to misunderstand. I mean, Jesus isn't correct to invoke fire imagery here because you get it from the Old Testament.
And I would even say, Isaiah, I think the seeds are there too, because you have that amazing parallel between the end of Isaiah and the end of Revelation, because you have the new heavens and the new earth in Isaiah 65. And then you have Isaiah ending on a real sour note with this fire that will not be quenched, and looking out at all the dead bodies and the maggots again, and this unquenchable fire.
There's plenty of legit material, to reference as far as the fiery descriptions. But I like I said, I don't know where the garbage dump thing. I don't know how that all got started. But
yeah, I don't know the origin of it. That'll be interesting. I remember. I think it was. Harold Honer, the late great Harold Honer from Dallas Seminary. I think he found he was the kind of person that would find these things. He found the source material for the rope. I think that the rope around the high priest's leg was some medieval Jewish writer. I can't remember the name, but I remember he found the source of that.
Yeah, that does sound like something he would do. He would spend time on. So why do you think Jesus uses the term?
Yeah, so I think, again, I don't think, just like Abraham's bosom and some of these other terms that we've talked about, I think in the imagery of the rich man and Lazarus in that parable, the cosmic geography, I don't think Jesus is being original here. I think he's using, if he's going to describe this, future place of punishment where the wicked will go, where the devil and his angels will go, he's going to use the language that they're mostly familiar with. And we do see that this imagery of this idea of Gehenna that goes back to this really hellish type of place that had all this wickedness. This was a common picture of that future place of punishment. And so Jesus is using that common idea. Again, he uses some other terms like eternal punishment. So one of the key places for a parallel for the lake of fire is his parable again in Matthew 25, where he says, really fascinating. He says to the wicked, he says, you will be thrown into this fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And so it's really interesting because he says to the righteous, you will come to the kingdom prepared for you. And so you have this image of the righteous, the kingdom is prepared for them, but the damned, hell is not prepared for them. It's prepared for the devil and the angels, and then they go there. And so I think maybe it's because Christ's redemption, his blood paid for all. And so no one need go there, but those who go there, kind of like C.S. Lewis says, ultimately are rejecting. They're in a locked room, a room locked from the door inside. So I always found that difference there. If you put him right there parallel in Matthew 25, he doesn't say prepared for you when he speaks to the damned. He says prepared for the devil. He brings in the devil and his angels. And of course, the devil and his angels in Revelation 20 are thrown onto the lake of fire. Mm-hmm. And at the end of Matthew 25, they go to eternal punishment. I think at Colossan, the Greek word ion kolosson. So the eternal punishment versus the ion zoe, the eternal life.
Even with the lake of fire there in Matthew 25, it's verse 41, Matthew 25:41, the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels, and then you get the lake of fire, language in Revelation. I mean, Jesus is also, dipping into familiar material there because, like prepared for the devil and his angels. I mean, that's going to come from Enoch, and that's very Enochian in its description there. And there aren't too many descriptions like it, but yeah, I mean, the fact that Jesus would use some of this familiar language, I mean, shouldn't surprise anybody.
That's right.
I don't know why. I mean, some are troubled, by this. I'm sure you know this well, that, well, you guys are trying to bring in all this extra material in to understand the Bible. Yeah, because it's context. It's context. Why wouldn't you do that if it's good enough for the biblical writers, and in this case, it's good enough for Jesus to give us these contexts, then why shouldn't we mention them now?
Exactly. I mean,
it doesn't make any sense.
It's Peter bringing in Tartarus. I mean, the fact that Peter brings in Tartarus, or Paul quotes the Stoic philosophers, or the Cretan, the line
right.
from Titus. Again and again, we see the biblical authors using, and even going back to the Old Testament, using the ancient Near Eastern imagery to redeem it and to show it's a vehicle for the truth of biblical revelation, I think.
We should talk a little bit about, let's focus on the lake of fire. And I have some notes here about the background for that being Daniel 7, 9 and 10. So Daniel 7 is going to be real familiar to the people in this audience, but let's just get into that material a little bit.
Yeah, that's my thought too. It's it's only used, lake of fire is only used in Revelation 6 times, and the even though it's paralleled, it's conceptually paralleled with Gehenna, or the eternal fire, or eternal punishment, the different ways that Jesus is referring to it. That the imagery that John is probably going off of is this picture in Daniel 7, specifically verse 9 and 10. I'll read it from the NASB. He says, "I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were open." And so you just have a lot of parallels there to that imagery in Revelation 20, because you have God seated on his throne, the books are open, it's judgment, angels are there. In Revelation 20, the resurrected righteous and wicked are there. And so I think this river of fire probably is what he's corresponding the ultimate place of punishment that people will be thrown if their names are not written in the book of life, the place prepared for the devil and his angels. This is that. This is that.
And you go back into Daniel 7, and who's being judged there? Well, it's the beasts,
right?
The chaos monsters there,
right?
So that would, again, it would make sense.
Verses 11 and 12, yep. And then the kingdom that the Son of Man will have gives all kingdoms give way to his kingdom, and so you have the eternal lake of fire has basically inaugurated at that point at the end of Revelation 20, and then 21 and 22 is the kingdom of the Son of Man, the God becoming all in all. It's the new heavens and the new earth that begins and will never end.
So now it's pretty clear you're taking the view that hell, the lake of fire, is eternal. Do you have any specific reasons for going that direction? I mean, I get this question a lot in Q&A, and I flip back and forth between what I would call the traditional view, the eternal, everlasting fire view, and annihilation, because the tough part for me is the death of death. And then you get in all these philosophical discussions. Well, if death is dead, well, then how can people still be dying? And it's kind of a weird discussion, but it's still one that arises from some of the language in the text. So can you say a little bit about your view there?
Yeah, I do take. Trust me, if I could be convinced by, the text that the wicked will be annihilated, I will go with that, because I do think this is one of the most, I do think this is one of the most difficult doctrines probably of Christianity. We talk about the problem of evil. I think the problem of hell, eternal hell, would be up there with things that are just really, I think, beyond us. I like what Tim Keller said, in the past. I've heard him say, we're on a need to know basis, and so God's told us things, and so we need to go off what we know, but maybe when we get there, there'll be things different.
Get answers to your questions. Yeah.
there'll be some things that we don't. But I guess, exegetically, my argument would be, Revelation 14, the fact that this is going to be a place where, they have no rest day and night. Those who worship the beast and his image, their smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. And the fact that that's the same language that's used at the end of Revelation 20 for, Satan and the beast and the false prophet, that they have no rest day and night forever and ever. And then again, if you parallel it with Matthew 25, the righteous go to eternal life, Ion Zoe, eternal life, and then it's directly parallel with Ion Colossan, eternal punishment. And so, it just seems to me that if we're gonna, exist forever with the Father and the Son and the Spirit in this new heavens and new earth, then it would be strange in that same verse for Ion to mean some temporal place of punishment, versus on forever.
The effect of it would still be atemporal. You're not going to come back to life.
Right.
But it's a tough question. I don't do much directly as far as with apologetics. So I guess I wasn't aware that you feel that it's such an acute problem, like on a par with the problem of evil. But that's interesting to me to hear you say that.
Yeah, in a way, I think it's. I mean, for me personally, I can't speak for in general. I just think for me personally, I would say it just seems like a bigger problem, the problem of evil, because the problem of evil is for sure solved. If hell is eternal, then it's never solved. It goes on forever. The great, the Amazing Grace hymn, 10,000 years, right? At the end of the 10,000 years, they're still suffering in hell.
Right.
So it's like that, so the problem of evil is bad, but there's a solution, there's a restoration, like Tolkien says in the Lord of the Rings, everything sad becomes untrue, I think so. You have that great hope, but the again, to bring in Dante, abandon all ye hope, you who enter here, that's the most terrifying thing to me. That's why I think Matthew 7:21 is probably the most terrifying passage in the Bible. Away from me, you evildoers, I never knew you. That to me is to be shut out from. And again, I don't think you're shut out completely from God, because God is the one who keeps the fuel going in the lake of fire. But you're shut out from his mercy and his grace and his love. You're shut out. You're only there for his wrath and for his justice. So I, in some senses, scripturally, I understand it, because, the offense to an eternal God requires justly an eternal punishment. But I think just that idea, the eternality of it is what is difficult.
Yeah, no, putting it that way, I can see where you'd rank those two things together.
And if I could quote you brought up the issue of dying. This may give us all nightmares, but I find this text at the end of City of God from Augustine, one of the most profound things ever said on this, the second death, same thing as lake of fire. He says, "Nevertheless, with the help of the grace of our Redeemer, we may be enabled to decline or avoid that second death. For that death, which means not the separation of soul from the body, but the union of both for eternal punishment, is the more grievous death. It is the worst of all evils. There, by contrast, men will not be in the situations of before death and after death, but always in death. And for this reason, they will never be living, never dead, but dying for all eternity. In fact, man will never be in death in a more horrible sense than in that state where death itself will be deathless." That one always gets me.
Yeah, I've not heard that from Augustine before.
And it does seem, again, it did seem to be.
It's a tough doctrine, because I don't know if I would agree with Augustine that death will be deathless because of the death of death in Revelation. But again, it goes back to the question of what does that mean? And the short answer is I don't really know.
Yeah, and that's where I would fall. That's where I would fall. And that's where I've cut, to people, especially people, again, people who've had loved ones who've died, who they believe were not in Christ. I've especially as a pastor, I've counseled them, and this is where I go with them on this kind of thing. As I go, even though I'm not going to water this down, I'm not going to say I'm suddenly
can't give them assurance when you don't have it.
Right. And I'm not going to suddenly say, oh, yeah, I'm convinced of annihilationism when I'm not. It's more of that kind of need to know that. And again, I point to just the mercy and the grace of Christ. I say, if Jesus is on the throne bearing those wounds, he suffered hell himself on the cross. I think, like Abraham said, will not the judge of the earth do right? I'm just, I completely, give it all to him. I know that if Jesus is on that throne, the man who washed Judas's feet, he will do right. That's what I'm convinced of. Whatever hell is, whatever that ultimately will be, I completely trust Jesus.
It's part of his job description, not ours.
That's right.
Yeah. Let's try to end a little bit more positively. Let's go to Abraham's bosom. This is in my notes. This is the one thing we haven't really hit on yet. But say a little bit about Luke 16 in part 1. But let's focus a little bit more on the good side here with Abraham's bosom in paradise. What's your take on this portion of Luke 16?
Yeah, so we talked about in part 1. We talked about how Jesus is, I think, authenticating this fuller understanding of where we get seeds of it. In the Old Testament, we have the righteous and the wicked going to the underworld, and then in the intertestamental time, you have First Enoch 22 and Josephus and some other places where there is this fuller understanding of, okay, there may be different chambers, different abodes. There may be a gulf separating where the wicked are, where the righteous are, and the experience of each is very different. And then Jesus tells this parable. And again, I think that the main point of the parable isn't to teach us this cosmic geography. I think the main point of the parable, again, is dealing with, the love of money. If you read the context of Luke 16, he's telling this parable to money worshiping Pharisees, basically. And you get this image of this very rich, kind of parallel to them. And he's clearly Jewish man that, and at that time, they would have thought this is if anybody's going to be in heaven, if anybody's going to be saved,
anybody's blessed, it's this guy. Yeah.
It's going to be this guy. He had this, all the pomp and circumstance with his funeral. He had all this money. He's Jewish. He's a son of Abraham. And then Jesus places him in hellfire. Again, I said it wrong. Hades fire, because he's not in the future hell. He's in this temporal punishment. But he pictures Abraham across this gulf in this realm that he refers to as Abraham's bosom. Again, I think this imagery is again not original to Jesus. I think this is just what was a common way for the Jews to think of the good part of the next life would be you would be with the patriarchs. You'd definitely be with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I think it kind of parallels what Jesus says, in Matthew 8, where he talks about how, we'll be seated in the kingdom at the table with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the prophets. So to be in Abraham's bosom, hard to be in a better place than that when you die. If you're where Abraham is, you got it good. And so as we talked about, I think that the Hades there shouldn't be translated hell. I think the best translation would be just Hades, and maybe a note to explain what that is, because it's this temporal place of punishment that is a place for souls of the wicked. And you have, again, the cosmic geography of another place, though, a place of water. And it's really Edenic. That's what's cool about it, is it's, even some of the church fathers, use the language of the Elysian fields of the Greeks. And then the Jewish imagery, of course, would be Eden. And with Eden, you have water, you have springs of water. And this is the kind of imagery you get in the Enoch passage. And in Josephus, you have, it's a very Edenic-like place. And interestingly, Garden of Eden in the Greek translation of the Hebrew gets translated as paradisos. This is where paradise becomes a very, theologically loaded term. The origin of it is more, just parks and just, beautiful parks and places of vineyards and like a walled area with fruit and all kinds of, and water and springs of water and things like that. I think it goes back to the Persians and the Greeks used it this way.
Yeah, there's royalty imagery there too, even from the Old Testament and the Assyrians. I don't know what episode it was on the podcast. At one time we did an episode on Jesus as the gardener, and we got into this paradise language. It's actually very interesting.
Oh,
How
so
it's associated with kingship, and the Edenic paradise, the trees, the whole bit. It's one of those things it's really easy to read right over, but there's so much packed into it.
yeah, it's so rich. And so just to parallel, so my argument, and this isn't an argument that a lot have made, and I think it's kind of for it to be consistent, which I think it is, it's demanded, which is paradise. I see in the New Testament as more of a adaptable state of being, in the sense of this is where Christ is. This is ultimately where Jesus is paradise. And of course, it's going to have all that Edenic imagery along with it. But ultimately, it's a more transferable term versus the others. And so my argument with that is basically the thief on the cross, really the criminal on the cross, probably a guy that fought against Rome or something. He didn't just steal pears or something. So he asked Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And then Jesus gives him, like he does with all of us, he gives far more than he asked. He says, this very day, today, you will be with me. And then he says, in paradise. And again, to parallel it with the descent imagery, if he really did go with Jesus that very day somewhere when they died, it would have been Abraham's bosom. It would have been. So I think paradise in that text is the same as Abraham's bosom, this Edenic-like place. This criminal on the cross gets the honor of being with Jesus as he enters that realm, possibly with, again, rescuing them from there, proclaiming.
Right.
Maybe this is when he proclaimed the gospel, like 1 Peter 4 or 5 says, he proclaimed the gospel to those who are now dead. This may be what that's talking about. And the with me part is what I think is key for paradise, because paradise is used 2 more times in the New Testament, and both times it's another distinct place, which in 2 Corinthians 12, it's the third heaven, and that's where Jesus is in that context. And then in Revelation 2, it's the ultimate, fulfillment of paradise, which is the new heavens and the new earth, the new Jerusalem. So you see the transfer of the locale, but I think what's consistent about all three is that Jesus is in all 3 places.
Yeah. So you have him and again the criminal, the thief, going into the afterlife, again positive afterlife, Abraham's bosom. Again in that afterlife place, Jesus is visiting other places too.
Right.
Is that just a rough sketch of what you're saying there?
Exactly. Yeah, I think he did go other places. I don't know if he took the criminal with him to those other places.
Well, right. He's there's be no reason to take him down to where the Watchers are, and
That's right.
Tell them they're still doomed.
That's right. I think he ended up getting that awesome introduction with all the saints of old in the place of in the blessed place of the underworld, and then whatever. Whenever they ultimately were taken, probably at the ascension, when they were all ultimately taken to the locale of heaven, that's when he would have gone there. But yeah, that would have been the first thing that they would have experienced, I think, is that, and that's why the today would be literally fulfilled in that sense, and that's why I think you have to equate for Luke's understanding, when he says paradise, he is bringing in all that Edenic imagery and the hope of the Messiah to open those gates and to remove the cherubim and to let man back into paradise. And the criminal is kind of given this, first, incredibly, he's given the first entrance to this place. But sees Abraham's bosom doesn't actually become paradise until Jesus is there. And that's why he says, today you will be with me in paradise. And so I like that imagery. So it's a way to make sense of the 3 different uses of the term.
Well, it would, but so you haven't found that in many commentators, because it does help make sense of things.
I have to go back. If I did, I referenced them in the book. I know what I find a ton is even for commentators like one of my favorite, Joachim Jeremias. He wrote, a lot of the TD&T articles for Paradise. He wrote it for Hades. He wrote it for the Abyss. And what's interesting, and he argues strongly. He has some great discussions on the descent, and he argues for the descent. I'm right with him on everything, but see, he says, but this seems like a contradiction because Jesus goes to paradise on this day, not the underworld. But see, but if paradise is the Abraham's bosom, then it solves the problem immediately. So that's what I found a lot is like Jeremiah's. I found people struggling with that problem, but not solving it, and that's how I.
But it makes me, when I come across stuff like that, it makes me wonder why it didn't occur to other writers.
I agree. Yeah, and I'm sure other people agree with that, but there weren't many. This was definitely this is a minority view. But I think if it's explained this way, then I think it should convince, especially anybody who agrees with the descent, I think.
Yeah, well, it has explanatory power. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like things that have explanatory power in more than just one place, that you can get this ripple effect and build this consistency across the board. So I find that appealing.
And a great background passage, just for those in your audience, they can go and read the Testament of Levi, if they have, if you have the Charlesworth 2 volumes of the Old Testament pseudepigrapha, you can, grab grab that and look up Testament of Levi, chapter 18. That's where you have this amazing passage, and that it seems to be pre-Christ that this was written, and it's talking about how the Messiah will open the gates to paradise. He will remove the barrier for man to paradise, and so Jesus fulfills, that very thing.
Wow, it's interesting. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask, how do you, in the course of our discussions, you've, I think rightly so, have corrected a lot of what people run into in their English translations. How do you usually handle that with people? I mean, do you get any pushback on that when you discuss this or other topics? I've found that, sometimes people feel like they can't understand their Bibles or whatever. What note of encouragement would you give as far as, being able to tap into some of this stuff, penetrate beyond the English that they have?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I teach Greek, when I've taught Greek at Dallas Seminary for many semesters, one of the things I like to say is, to inspire them, to get them excited. Of course, I'm a big movie buff. I always say, reading the English translations is you're going to get the main thing. You're going to get the gist. You're going to get salvation. You're going to get theology. You're going to get a full understanding of what's going on. You're not going to miss the big things if you're only reading it in the translations. If you're only reading it, assuming you're reading, of course, a good translation. I'm not talking about the message, of course, but as long as you're reading a good English translation, you're going to get the big thing. But I parallel to it's more like a DVD at this point. If you watch a DVD movie compared to the 4K, like if you watch Lord of the Rings on a DVD, an old DVD movie versus watching it on Blu-ray or even the 4K on HBO Max on a big screen, that would be to me the difference between reading the English and reading it in the original languages. When you read it in the original languages, just like on the 4K, you're starting to see things that you never saw because some of those details were so grainy that you couldn't see it as clear. And so that's why I encourage, and there are a lot of ways to do it. They got the Blue Letter Bible. There's a lot of ways to learn some basic concepts and basic terms, key terms.
Net Bible is available for free.
Net Bible is excellent. That they're largely, pretty much all their notes, as are dealing with, the Hebrew and the Greek. And so an excellent resource. There's so many great resources, even if you don't ever learn the original languages. But I think my main encouragement, though, is, if you're reading NIV, NASB, ESV, Net, if you're reading through those Bibles and you're in the Bible on a regular basis, I wouldn't say you're missing anything of essential value, but you are maybe missing like Tartarus. You're maybe
sure.
These things are still important if you want to go as deep as you can to understand every jot and tittle, which we do. You want to understand every aspect of the scriptures and what it's teaching, to approach it and understand it as best as we can, to rightly divide the word. I think it's worth going to the original language, but I think there should be the encouragement that you're ultimately not missing the biggest things, of course.
I would agree. I mean, all the essentials are gonna be, they're gonna be readily apparent to somebody who's, a serious reader of an English Bible. I always like to say the best English Bible is the one you'll actually read. But I would tend to agree with
That's right.
your comment about paraphrases. I don't really like paraphrases.
Yeah.
Or translations that are so idiosyncratic, usually done by one person, stuff like that.
And they really do show their bias. I don't like, I joke about the Message, but even like the New Living Translation, a lot of people use that in churches. And I find the New Living Translation to be, in a lot of places, just really more of a paraphrase than actually.
Yeah, that's because it was trying to make the Living Bible less of a paraphrase,
right.
But it's still, it's still in the same turf in some respects.
And that's what I would encourage people to do, especially, like we said, having a good study Bible, which I think, the best study Bibles out there are the Net Bible, the Net Study Bible, the ESV Study Bible, probably there's an NIV Study Bible. There's actually a King James Study Bible that I found, because it's the first time I ever went through the King James, and I found it's a scholarly version. It's got, and a lot of DTS professors were involved in it. But just that's what I would encourage, not only getting Bibles with great notes, but just reading through different translations. Don't just read through the same translation, because maybe you will miss, if you only read NASB, for example, even though you're getting the goods on most everything else, you'd never know about Tartarus, 2 Peter 2:4, you'd think it was hell. And so reading different translations will open your eyes to new things. I always said, when I first read the New Testament and the Old Testament in the original languages, it was like reading it almost like for the first time in a lot of ways, because I was seeing so many new things. So I think that can happen also with reading other translations.
Yeah. Yeah, and the same thing will happen to you if you read the Septuagint as well. There'll just be new things in there that, you never would have run into before.
That's right.
Well, that's good. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that's where they're, the New Testament writers many times are drawing from the Septuagint. So I agree with someone said that, the Septuagint is one of the best things to read as a background to the New Testament.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'm glad we could do this again. I think our listeners will find it informative and stimulating. This is what we try to do in the podcast, to expose people to how academics, look at the Bible and how they go through it. But again, we try to get people on when we have guests, who have a high view of Scripture. They do good scholarship. Again, have a high view of the text and want to do something deliberate to try to make this information decipherable, to the normal person in the pew. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here again with you. So thankful for your work.
Another great conversation with Dr. Bass, and I'm glad we ended it on a high note there with Paradise, because the first episode and the first half of this one, is doom and gloom. But at least we got some positivity.
It could get depressing.
Yeah. And anything else? I mean, can you give me, like you did last episode, just a quick summary of kind of what we talked about?
Yeah, well, I think it's important. Again, we talked about Gehenna and the lake of fire and Abraham's bosom, also referred to as paradise here. And I think it's important, again, to recognize that Jesus is using vocabulary that's going to be familiar to his hearers. And ultimately, when it gets written down in the New Testament, ultimately it's going to be known to readers. He's not just sort of freewheeling something, but he's gone with what's familiar to them to communicate these ideas. And I kind of like Justin's take on the way he linked up Abraham's bosom and paradise there, because it does help, I think, answer the question of, what happens with the thief on the cross and the descent. If you believe that Jesus actually descended into the underworld and then, preached, to the spirits in prison, as in 1 Peter 3, that would be the watchers, the sinning angels of Genesis 6, and then, delivered sinners more generally when he rose from the dead. All this stuff can be confusing, but it can fit together. So I kind of appreciated the way he did that.